Welcome back, part 2 of the chapter 1 lecture. So we are still talking about the model of communication, and now we're talking about the channel, which is the method of transmission through space and time that the message is delivered. In other words, it's just what is the means by which the message is delivered. Oops. So if I call you on the telephone, what's the channel? The telephone, right? If I am talking to you in person, 6 feet apart, what's the channel? Face to face. If I am talking to you through a live Zoom meeting, what's the channel? Zoom. So the method of transmission. So the telephone can be a channel, face-to-face can be a channel, Zoom can be a channel. Those are channels. How is the message delivered? Noise is anything that distorts the message. So noise can be external or internal. Now, external noise is actual noise. So if you're talking to someone and you're at an outside loud restaurant and lots of noise is going on, that's real noise. If I am talking to you and you're thinking, oh my God, I have so much to do and I don't even understand my trigonometry assignment and I'm going to get an F on that test and why did I even sign up for that? And I'm still talking to you and that's what you're thinking about, your trigonometry assignment, your test you have. Are you really listening to me? No. And why? Because of the internal noise in your head. So internal noise is just the noise in your head that makes it hard to get the message. Context is the time and place in which the communication occurs. And we also refer to context as what situation is the communication occurring or in what type of a relationship. So for example, when we talk about communicating in a work situation with a coworker, so work would be the context, or we talk about communicating with a family member. That's a context. Communicating in a romantic relationship, that's a different context. So communicating with a neighbor, that's another context. So interpersonal communication can occur in a variety of contexts, right? Fidelity, that should say of. I'm seeing all my typos, sorry. The degree of, right here, the word is of, O-F, degree of similarity between the meaning systems of the sender and receiver. The degree of similarity between the meaning systems of the sender and receiver. So you can have high or low fidelity. So here's a true story that I would tell you if we were face to face. I'm going to tell you right now. So I'll take off my glasses to tell you this story. So a long time ago, I was going with my husband to have dinner with my friend and her boyfriend. So it was going to be like a double date. And we were going to Javier's. So for those of you that know, Javier's, Mexican restaurant. And we had a plan, Sunday night, meet at 5. So I get to Javier's starving because it's one of my favorite restaurants. So I'm starving because I want to eat a lot of chips and salsa. And I get there and I don't see my friend. So I walk around looking for her. I don't see her. And I text her and say, hey, I'm here. And then she says, hey, I'm here too. And I said, well, I don't see you. And I don't see you either. Well, I'm on the patio. Well, so am I. So we go back and forth. I don't see you. I don't see you. I'm here. Then she says, I'm here also. What happened? Well, I was at Javier's Irvine Spectrum. She was at Javier's Laguna Beach. Those of you that are probably not old enough to know that before Javier's got to Newport Beach, they were in Laguna Beach. So that's where she was, in Laguna Beach. I'm in Irvine Spectrum. So that is an example where she and I had low fidelity. And our husbands, boyfriends thought it was hilarious because we both teach interpersonal communication. Ha, ha, ha. Okay, and we couldn't get the plan right for dinner. So remember we said people have different frames of reference? I just assumed Javier's Irvine Spectrum. That's what my Javier's has always been. So in that example, we had low fidelity. So the higher the fidelity, the more accurate the understanding is between the sender and the receiver. Now, usually the goal is high fidelity, but let's say you're living at home and your mom asks you, you're leaving, your mom says, "Where are you going, honey?" And you say, "Oh, out." Now, do you want her to know exactly what you mean by out? Probably not. So sometimes on purpose, we want to be vague so people don't know exactly what we mean. But in situations like if you're making a plan with someone or if you're talking to a coworker or a boss, most situations in communication, we are trying to achieve high fidelity. And who has the responsibility of high fidelity? Is it the encoder or the decoder? Sender or receiver? As I said, I use those words interchangeably. The answer is to this question, it's both people. The sender and the receiver have responsibility in order to achieve high fidelity. As a sender, I need to make sure I'm very clear and specific in my message. And as the decoder, I need to make sure how I interpreted the message is actually accurate and I'm not just making an assumption in my head. We'll be talking about all these things as we go along in the semester. So in a nutshell, people who study communication, we focus on messages. We're all about the sending and the receiving of messages, verbal messages, nonverbal messages. And throughout this semester, this is what we'll be covering in this class, verbal messages, nonverbal messages, and how we send and receive those messages. Now, there are different, we said context earlier, I talked about. Another way you can look at contexts, you can look at how communication is studied. And I'm going to tell you the following list that you're going to see. This is really not what our focus is in this class. So you can take classes like at Saddleback College or other universities. There are classes on intercultural communication, which focus on how cultures interact with each other or people within the culture and how they perceive verbal and nonverbal messages. There is mass communication. So all the political debates and political conventions that are going on where people are giving speeches to the masses and how they're trying to persuade the masses. That is not what we're studying in this class. Organizational communication looks at how messages are sent and received within organizations like large companies. Small group communication focuses on the sending and receiving of messages in a small group, obviously. So a lot of that class, you look at like juries and how decisions are made amongst the 12 people in a jury, for example. Okay, now this one we do talk about since it's the name of the class, interpersonal communication. We will also be talking about intrapersonal communication. Intrapersonal communication is communication within the self or self-talk. So I'll be covering this in next week's lecture, but this is that little voice in your head that makes you do good things or bad things. So if you're a runner, and you're running and you're trying to run your, let's say 5 miles and you get to mile 4, you're really tired. That voice in your head is saying, keep going, you got this, you got this. That other voice is saying, it's so hot outside. You can stop. You need to stop. You're tired. You've done enough. 4 miles, that's a lot. Take a break. So whichever voice you listen to, it's kind of like you got the devil and the angel talking to you at the same time. That's intrapersonal communication, the voice in your head. And you can use that voice for positive or you could use that voice for negative. There's that angel and the devil that are both going at you. And so we'll be talking about that as we, especially next week, how the voice in your head is so powerful. And actually you have the power to change the voice in your head. So we talk about that next week. And then the name of the class, obviously, interpersonal communication, which is a special form of human communication that occurs when we interact simultaneously with another person and mutually influence each other. Now, if you have the course packet, you will notice that definition is already there for you, so you don't have to write it down. All right, so I don't love that definition. It's kind of wordy and mumbo jumbo. So I want to talk a little bit more about what is interpersonal communication. So I'm going to talk about the characteristics of interpersonal communication. One characteristic of it is that it is dyadic, and that just means it happens amongst two people. So in this class, and when you're doing homework assignments and interpersonal shares, which I'll talk about later, I always want you focusing on communication that happens with two people only. And a lot of times in the homework assignment, I'm asking you to write about you and your interpersonal communication examples. So that means I want to hear about you plus one person communicating together. Okay. So that's what a dyad means, two people. And that's what this class is focusing on, two people. Now, you can have a relationship with two people that can be more impersonal or more interpersonal. And relationships are not either or, impersonal or interpersonal, but they happen on this is called a continuum. Some relationships are very impersonal. So let's assume you went to CopyMax and bought the course packet. When you had to go there in person, you had to go to the place, go to the cash register, and they said, "How can I help you?" And you said, "I'm here to pick up the packet." That was very impersonal. You probably don't care if you ever see that person again. I'm assuming and hoping they were nice and polite to you, but I'm guessing you didn't become best friends when you went to buy that packet. You're probably a little irritated, honestly. So, that's an example of a highly impersonal relationship that you have. You and the person at CopyMax versus your very, very best friend. That's what we would call a very interpersonal relationship. So it's not either or. It's not like everyone in your life is either your very, very best friend or a virtual stranger that you're buying a packet from. A lot of people fall somewhere in between. But what we're going to talk about are some of the features that would make a relationship more interpersonal versus impersonal. Remember, impersonal, if you need to write this down, CopyMax person. Interpersonal, your best friend. Okay. So I don't like how my PowerPoint is doing this. So I'm just going to show you. You have a list of these terms in your packet. So you see these terms here. So all of these terms indicate that the relationship is more interpersonal. So I'm going to discuss these briefly, starting with uniqueness. So you're going to have a lot more uniquenesses in a close relationship. So think of you and your best friend. You might have inside jokes, inside stories. I know I have teenagers that are they just turned 15. And when they get with their very best friends, I don't even understand what they're saying because they have their own language, their own code, and they know it very well. And they talk back and forth. And I'll say, what do you mean? What are you talking about? And oh, nothing. And so I'm in the dark with their conversations. But when they talk with their best friends, they all understand each other because they have a uniqueness in their communication. When you order the course packet and you go to buy it, I don't think there's a lot of uniqueness. You just said, "Hey, can I please get that course packet?" And there's no uniqueness, right? Irreplaceability. So obviously, your best friend is much more irreplaceable versus the person, the poor person who you bought your packet from at CopyMax. If you have to go back to CopyMax, hopefully you don't, and it's a different person, you're probably not going to be too upset. Right? You're probably going to be fine. But if your best friend is gone and moves, you're going to be pretty upset, I'm assuming. Then interdependence has to do with how much the welfare and satisfaction of one person is dependent on another person. Now, I'm not saying a psychotherapy term, you may have heard codependent. That is not what I'm talking about. It's not some kind of unhealthy interdependence. It's just that, let's say something good happens to your best friend, that sort of affects you. Something not so good happens to your best friend, that sort of affects you. So the more closely intertwined you are with someone, the closer your relationship is going to be. Self-disclosure has to do with revealing information to yourself, not to yourself, about yourself to another person. Revealing important, deeper information about you to another person. Typically, we say that happens in more interpersonal relationships. The people that you're closer to, you're going to open up more to. Then this notion of an intrinsic reward. So back to the impersonal relationships. When you went to CopyMax and asked for the course packet, you had what's called an extrinsic reward because you wanted the packet. So what was your reward? It was the packet. That was your goal of communication. When you are talking, oopsie daisy, when you are talking to your best friend, a lot of the time there is no goal that you have for the communication. You don't have some hidden agenda. The reason you guys are talking together is just for the intrinsic reward of the relationship itself. And that's the reason you're talking. That's the reward, because of the relationship itself. So if you look at all these qualities or characteristics, that's how you would distinguish what we call an interpersonal relationship versus an impersonal relationship. So this week, you're going to be having to do homework number 1. And what I'm looking for in homework number 1 is for you to talk about, you're going to have to talk about your strengths and weaknesses in communication. And I want you to give an example from an interpersonal relationship. So I'm looking for examples like with coworkers, your neighbors, your best friend, your friends, your family, romantic partner. What I am not looking for is for you to say, when I went to the cash register at CopyMax, I gave good eye contact and spoke clearly. Because I am really not interested in your impersonal communication encounters as much as I would be in your interpersonal communication encounters. So keep that in mind whenever you're doing homework assignments. So what we say is that the majority of our communication is impersonal, meaning it's on a continuum. It is not either or. As I said, this is what I said earlier. So like I said, it's not like every single person you interact with is either impersonal or interpersonal. But for this class, when you are doing homework assignments, especially, and I ask you for a lot of specific examples in your responses from an interpersonal relationship, I'm looking for people that are more on this side of the spectrum. People, like I just said, that you're closer to, that you have more involvement with. And it doesn't have to be someone you're emotionally close to. You can use neighbors, coworkers, because you have an interdependence with those people. What happens to your neighbor or coworker has an effect on you in some cases. And so that's fine to talk about communication with people like that. But again, I just don't want to hear examples from your impersonal situations for the most part. Okay? So that is going to wrap up this lecture, and I will talk to you next lecture. Stay safe, everyone. Stay well. Talk to you soon.